Alrighty, so good evening, everybody. Welcome to our October event, History of Haunted Happenings. My name is Rachel Christone. I am the Director of Education here at the Salem Witch Museum.
And I'm Jill Christensen. I'm the Assistant Director of Education.
Now you get some bonus points if you came to today's lecture dressed in a costume, even though we can't see you. It's still very fun. We are wearing some of our Halloween garb. So this event is being recorded. It will be shared on our YouTube page at a later time. So if you want to watch it again, or you know someone who wanted to watch it and couldn't be here, it will be shared there probably later this week. And as always, we will have some time for questions at the end of the presentation. So we'll ask you hold your questions until the very end. We'll have about 15 minutes to address those questions through the chat. So now we are going to turn off our camera so you can see our full beautiful screen, and we're going to get started.
This year marks the 40th anniversary of the Haunted Happenings Festival here in Salem. For those of you who have never visited Salem in October, this is a month-long celebration of the fall and Halloween. The city transforms. Businesses and homes are adorned in spooky decor. Visitors arrive in costume for the entire month, and an array of activities and experiences are offered throughout the city. Each year, thousands of people travel to Salem to participate in haunted happenings. In fact, 2021 saw record October crowds surpassing 812,000 people in a city of approximately 43,000 residents. We're two of those residents. For many, visiting Salem in October is a bucket list activity. People plan their trips months, sometimes years in advance. Weddings, elopements, honeymoons, anniversary trips, and more take place during this month. Visitors are thrilled and delighted to be in Salem and experience everything the city has to offer during this autumnal celebration. With that being said, haunted happenings is not beloved by all. Salem residents often complain about the unbelievable traffic. Others bemoan this celebration as irreverent, harshly criticizing Salem's Halloween celebration as a disrespectful money grab, a commercialization of the city's tragic past. Recently, we saw a comment from one member of our Facebook community that referred to haunted happenings as a marketing campaign. In this talk, we hope to dispel this conventional judgment. The true origins of this festival are far more complex. As we discuss how haunted happenings came to be, we will begin by focusing on two essential and interlocking stories: the origins of Halloween and the evolution of public memory in Salem.
We're going to begin with the latter, the story of the Salem Witch Trials in public memory. For those of you who are not familiar with the story of the 1692 witch trials, here's a very brief overview. And if you've attended any of our other virtual lectures, you can probably say this part along with us. In the winter of 1692, two young girls in the home of Reverend Samuel Parris, the minister of Salem Village, today the town of Danvers, began to exhibit strange and frightening symptoms of a mysterious illness. They screamed, made animal sounds, writhed and twisted, and threw themselves to the floor. After a month with no improvement, a doctor was called. He could not find a medical reason for their strange fits, instead pronouncing them under an evil hand. It was likely the work of a witch, he said. This diagnosis triggered the largest and deadliest witch hunt in colonial North American history. By the time it ended a year and a half later, 19 people were executed, one man was tortured to death, at least 5 people died in prison, and 150 to 200 were accused of practicing witchcraft, arrested, and jailed. While these were certainly not the only witchcraft trials in colonial North American history, the overwhelming number of people drawn into these events, combined with the sense that something had clearly gone wrong, kept the witchcraft trials of 1692 in the realm of public discourse.
If you attended our recent Memorializing the Salem Witch Trials lecture, in which we marked the 30th anniversary of the creation of the Salem Witch Trials Memorial in downtown Salem, this next section will sound familiar. We feel this is worth repeating. Gretchen Adams, in her excellent book, The Spectre of Salem, describes how the Salem Witch Trials became an important foundational story in America's early years. Not only was it included in the nation's earliest school books as an example of a moral failing, but it also became, in Adams' words, a metaphor which, quote, functioned well as a universally familiar shorthand for the social and political costs of sliding backward into a colonial world of irrationality, tyranny, and superstition, unquote. One example is an anonymous letter circulated in 1741, which criticized the investigation of a series of fires set in New York that had been blamed on revolting slaves and led to the execution of 20 people. The letter's author noted these executions in New York, quote, put me in mind of our New England witchcraft in the year 1692, unquote.
Similar references to Salem were made during the Civil War. There were numerous examples of Southern politicians referencing the Salem trials in their criticisms of the North, countering the condemnation of slave owners by erroneously alluding to an imagined Puritan witch hunter who burned those accused of witchcraft at the stake. In 1869, one commentator remarked, quote, when a Virginian is in his most unwholesome frame of mind against the Yankees, he's apt to refer in terms either derisive or denunciatory to the New England trials for witchcraft.
Curious travelers have always been attracted to Salem's macabre history. To quote Salem Witch Trials historian Marilyn Roach, the tourists came before tourism. Salem is not necessarily unusual in this respect, as places of tragedy have long held cultural fascination. This phenomenon, known as dark tourism, is now the subject of an entire body of academic research. There are numerous examples of sites of dark tourism, such as the Colosseum in Rome, Civil War battlefields, and places of celebrity death. One of my favorite authors, history lover and humorist Sarah Vowell, visited the sites of political shootings and wrote a book about it called Assassination Vacation. Salem, as both a metaphor of social criticism and also a site made famous by a supernatural crime, immediately attracted visitors. While staying in the area in 1766, future President John Adams noted in his diary a visit to Witchcraft Hill, then believed to be the site of the 1692 executions.
This popular interest in the witchcraft trials can be seen in numerous other examples. The first Salem Visitor's Guide was published in 1880 and included information about the witch trials. We were actually surprised to read the introduction to the 1895 edition of the guide, which noted, quote, the witchcraft delusion, which caused many to flee from Salem for their lives 2 centuries ago, now brings thousands of visitors to Salem each year. Souvenirs referencing witchcraft emerged around this same time. A sterling silver witch spoon was created and sold during the late 1890s by Salem's Daniel Lowen Company. It is regarded not only as the first item to spark the souvenir spoon craze in America, but it's also thought to be the first Witch City souvenir. You can see it here. It's interesting to note, even though the spoon includes 1692, the date of the witchcraft trials, we also see a stereotypical witch depicted, rather than a 17th century Puritan. Already, history and pop culture were meshing. In the late 1800s, according to historian Francis Hill, a local Salem fish company also began branding its wares with the name Witch City. Others followed in short order, including a popcorn factory, bicycle manufacturer, boatyard, and oil firm.
It's relevant to pause here and briefly talk about the evolving image of the witch. Before witch trials ended across the Christian world, a witch was defined as a human being who made a pact with the devil in exchange for supernatural powers. While anyone could be accused of witchcraft, man, woman, or child. It was women who were most often targeted. It's estimated 75% of accusations were brought against women. Legal witchcraft trials came to an end in the mid-18th century. While a witch was no longer a criminal designation, the idea of a witch lingered on in popular culture, the stereotype retaining certain features based in historic beliefs, such as a black cat companion, flying through the air on a broomstick, and eating children. We're all likely familiar with children's classic fairy tales, many of which include an evil witch that fits this description. For example, Rapunzel, Snow White, or Hansel and Gretel. Throughout this period, witches are most commonly portrayed as evil old women, stirring a bubbling cauldron with a wart on their hooked nose. However, by the turn of the century, witches were starting to take on new characteristics. In 1900, L. Frank Baum published his classic children's story, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. This book introduced American audiences to their first good witches. Unlike the 1939 film, the book actually has two good witches, the older matronly Good Witch of the North and the young and beautiful Glinda of the South. Slowly, more and more beautiful witches emerged throughout the century. Here are a few examples from advertisements, illustrations, and Halloween postcards. By the 1980s, when Haunted Happenings was born, the term witch encompassed a diverse array of definitions, including a community of practitioners of a witchcraft religion living in Salem by that time. We'll discuss modern witchcraft a little later.
Let's now turn our attention to the celebration of Halloween. While much of the early history remains unclear, we do know that Halloween originated in the celebration of the ancient harvest festival, Samhain. This was a Celtic holiday and was celebrated by people living in what is now northern France, Ireland, England, Scotland, and Wales. There are almost no written records from this period to give us descriptions about how this holiday was celebrated, but we know some general details that have been passed down over time. Samhain was a celebration of the changing seasons, as this holiday marked the end of the harvest and the coming of winter, the end of the light half of the year and the beginning of the dark. Given the cycle of nature celebrated during this time, death and the afterlife were major components of the holiday. In fact, it was believed the veil was thinnest between this world and the next on October 31st, a day set aside to remember one's ancestors. On Samhain Eve, people believed that spirits were able to return to the physical world to visit their living family. Offerings of wine or food would be left for the weary souls traveling to Earth. There was always concern that evil spirits could come along with those of your loved ones, and so people would sometimes wear masks and disguises during Samhain festivities, theoretically shielding them from malicious wandering souls. People also carried noisemakers to frighten away harmful spirits, and masked villagers would form parades out of their communities in an attempt to lead away any bad specters from the celebration.
Leslie Pratt Bannatyne, in her book, Halloween, An American Holiday in American History, notes that by the 8th century Common Era, Pope Gregory III moved the Christian celebration All Saints' Day to November 1st. This move was likely an attempt to Christianize the existing pagan traditions some were slow to give up. When November 1st became All Saints' Day, alternatively known as All Hallows, the night before became known as All Hallows' Eve. By 1000 Common Era, November 2nd was officially declared All Souls' Day. After this event, October 31st, November 1st, and November 2nd together became an important annual tradition known as Hallowmas. When Hallowmas traditions varied from region to region, some are recognizable as the forerunners to festivities we know and love today. For example, the practice of going house to house, asking for a treat, has roots in traditions native to the British Isles. In England, this tradition was called souling or soul caking, adapted as a replacement for the pagan practice of leaving offerings for returning spirits. People began to offer baked goods known as soul cakes to the town's poor. in exchange for their prayers for departed relatives. In Scotland, a similar custom called guising involved young men adorned in costume going door to door, carrying turnip lanterns, the predecessor of the jack-o'-lantern, asking for treats such as apples, nuts, or coins. Over time, young men roamed about after dark looking for mischief and asking for treats at neighboring homes to prevent them from doing damage. The tricks were fairly harmless, setting horses free, removing garden gates, or stealing cabbages.
Many of the symbols we associate with Halloween today can be traced to these early harvest celebrations, particularly as practiced in the British Isles. The History Channel's documentary, The Haunted History of Halloween, reported that bats and owls were attracted to Samhain bonfires. While it's hard to know for sure, it seems likely this could be why these icons have remained closely linked with this holiday for thousands of years. The same is true for demons. Today, it's natural to see people dressed as ghosts, the devil, or demonic creatures on Halloween night. Again, because this holiday was strongly associated with death and the spirit world, spooky subjects originally associated with this Celtic festival, like demons, ghosts, ghouls, and skeletons, remained with this holiday as it evolved over time. Most relevant to our story is, of course, the association of Halloween and witches. The tie is likely derived from the witch's historic role as the devil's handmaiden.
Irish and Scottish traditions particularly impacted Halloween celebrations in America. Devastating Irish famines in the mid-1800s led to mass immigration to the United States. Immigrants brought homeland customs with them. As in the days of old, on Halloween, young men in the immigrant neighborhoods wandered at night, playing good-natured tricks and asking for treats. Women stayed in, playing divination games. Fortune-telling was a central element of these gatherings, particularly for young women hoping to discern their future husbands. Play parties of the 1800s, annual autumn social events with corn husking, dunking for apples, dancing, and ghost storytelling were also an important element of what would become modern-day Halloween.
By the late 1800s, American ladies' magazines, directed to the middle and upper classes, began to write of old autumnal traditions. As members of proper society embraced Halloween, rather than focusing on the spooky elements of the holiday, they became more interested in Halloween parties, what to serve, how to decorate, what games to play. Children were not the focus of these parties, many of which were hosted by the socially privileged. By the 1890s, local newspapers around the country were starting to write about Halloween. By the 1920s, magazines regularly provided suggestions for decor, and here's a couple of great examples from some of these old magazines of decor suggestions. Recipes, cakes, and treats that you could make for a Halloween party, games and activities, place cards, even costume suggestions, these being really fun, kind of ornate costumes, and more.
As these parties were taking place among upper-class adults, vandalism and nighttime mischief continued to grow rowdier in cities across North America from 1870 to 1920, according to Nicholas Rogers' book, Halloween, From Pagan Ritual to Party Night. Perhaps this is why by 1920, communities began to organize indoor celebrations for children to try to tame the Halloween mayhem and keep kids off the streets. Traveling to visit these various costumed parties eventually revived the centuries-old tradition of going house to house asking for treats. Brock's Candy Company started manufacturing candy corn in the late 1920s, and mass-produced Halloween costumes became available in the 1930s. From the 40s to the 60s, Halloween was primarily a children's holiday. In the 1970s, adults returned to the celebrations as well.
The 1970s also saw the first reports of tainted candy and treats, as well as tales of razor blades and apples. These stories were largely urban myth. The few true incidents were inside jobs, family members poisoning their own candy. In one particularly false example, a now debunked 1970 New York Times article ominously stated, quote, "Those Halloween goodies that children collect this weekend on their rounds of trick-or-treating may bring more horror than happiness. Within the last 5 years, the number of incidents involving poisonous or otherwise harmful treats given to young hobgoblins on Halloween has been growing at a rapid rate," unquote. This was not a true statement. By the next decade, there was actually one real and influential story, a case of Tylenol poisoning in Chicago. Media continued fanning the flames, and as a result of these various stories, parents became afraid to let their kids out after dark or to go trick-or-treating at all. The hysteria nearly destroyed one of the best things about Halloween. Nevertheless, somehow, this Halloween tradition continued on and has remained beloved by generations of children. Now, from our perspectives, Jill, trick-or-treating in the 1960s, remembers receiving apples and home-baked goods, while I, who grew up in the 1990s, was told never to take anything that was not pre-packaged. What a difference in just 30 years.
Here's where the threads of our two stories come together. In the mid-20th century, there was an ever-increasing national interest in Salem's witch-related past, in large part thanks to the 1949 publication of Marion Starkey's bestseller, The Devil in Massachusetts, the premiere of Arthur Miller's play The Crucible in 1953, and the 1970 broadcast of episodes of the popular TV series Bewitched, which were filmed in Salem. The main character of Bewitched, Samantha Stevens, was not only a beloved good witch, she was also depicted as America's sweetheart. Witches by this time were potential role models for little girls, a trend that continues to this day. More and more people traveled to Salem, drawn by the city's witch connection. Salem's modern tourism industry began in earnest in the 1970s. Our museum opened in 1972, one of the first museums in Salem dedicated to the story of the witchcraft trials.
So to recap, by the early 1980s, Halloween was growing in popularity and Salem's visitation was increasing. At the same time, media reports of poisoning scares became an annual feature of Halloween. At the beginning of that decade, Salem Witch Museum CEO Biff Michaud remembers hearing one of these reports on the radio. Fondly recalling his own childhood spent trick-or-treating, he felt it was important to create a safe, family-friendly fall festival, and Haunted Happenings was the result. Biff asked then Salem Witch Museum director Susanna Stewart to devote her time to this project. It was she who would conceive many of the events that would follow. Susanna joined forces with Joan Gormley of the Salem Chamber of Commerce, and these two women were the driving forces of the initial festival.
A trial run of sorts, 1981's Witches Weekend, only hinted at how successful Halloween in Salem would become. That first year included a bewitching ball sponsored by the Salem Witch Museum and an Insomniacs tour. Here we can see some images from that first ball featuring Biff up in that top row. On Halloween night, the Insomniacs tour departed from Hamilton Hall after the bewitching ball came to an end at midnight. Participants were brought to the Salem Witch Museum for a private presentation. And then following the museum visit, the group walked across the street to the Hawthorne Inn, which is now the Hawthorne Hotel. They were served a midnight buffet, including baked pumpkin soup, deviled eggs, cinnamon baked apples, hot spiced potato salad, and pumpkin pie, while Judith Black, a professional storyteller, told a ghost story. The evening ended at 2:30 a.m. The following year, 1982, the first official Haunted Happenings Festival took place. Among the festivities that year were a pumpkin carving contest, an apple bobbing contest, a psychic festival, a witch's brew contest, a great pumpkin hot air balloon, and a haunted ghost ship tour. A second bewitching ball gave an award for best costume, and the lucky winners won a trip to Transylvania. There was a children's costume parade judged by local witch Lori Cabot, a haunted house hosted by the Chamber of Commerce, and a Halloween parade featuring a live elephant, which referenced the first elephant to visit America, who had arrived on a ship owned by Salem merchant Jacob Crowninshield in 1796.
Several activities were planned specifically with safety and well-being in mind. The Bank of Boston sponsored trick-or-treat bags listing Halloween night safety tips. A spooky light witches flight road race was 6.2 miles long. Winners were equipped with ever-ready flashlights. A Dracula blood drive also took place, an opportunity to donate for a good cause while in the Halloween spirit. This 3-day event drew an estimated 50,000 visitors. Though Boston's New Year's Eve event, the annual First Night celebration, had served as a blueprint of sorts, the turnout this first year far exceeded anyone's expectations. It was so busy, in fact, that at one point, then Mayor Jean Levesque had to man the info booth. So this begs the question, why was Haunted Happenings immediately so popular? As we've already noted, Halloween had been increasing in popularity for all ages every year. This festival, hosted in a unique seaside New England city, was the perfect location for people to have fun, dress in costume, and enjoy the scenic foliage. Moreover, as witches have long been an icon of Halloween, Salem's connection to historic witchcraft brought another element of interest. We need to remember, for the average individual, a witch is not a real person, but an element of beloved culture. Halloween witches are, of course, not depicting the innocent victims of the Salem Witch Trials, but rather the fictional figure. Other October visitors are drawn by an entirely different version of the witch.
In addition to interest in fictional witches, the modern witchcraft religion has attracted more and more practitioners to Salem. These individuals follow an earth-based religion and find spiritual contentment in the legacy of the witch, particularly as a powerful, independent female figure. This religion began in the early 20th century in England, arrived in America in the 1960s, and became common in the 1970s, only growing in popularity since then. Beginning in the early 70s with the arrival of Laurie Cabot, later named the official witch of Salem by then Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis, Salem became a welcoming place for modern witches. Today, many witches live and work here. We take for granted, living in this unusual community, the acceptance of those who practice this neo-pagan religion. In the second exhibit at our museum, where we mention modern witchcraft, we sometimes see visitors visibly moved by the inclusion of their religion. We have been told by some that they come from places where they can't openly practice their beliefs, and they're grateful to be in Salem and have their identity acknowledged in our museum. In addition to modern witches, many other October visitors are drawn by an interest in New Age practices and will seek out the botanical stores, tarot readers, and crystal shops.
Halloween's popularity has only continued to grow in Salem, throughout the country, and throughout the world. At the same time, pop culture witches have exploded. In the 1980s and 1990s, they took over film, television, and Broadway. Charmed, Harry Potter, Wicked, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, The Craft, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Witches of Eastwick, Practical Magic, and more. On the whole, these witches were positive, even inspirational figures, significantly impacting the perception of witches among the new generations. Today, witches are more popular than ever, particularly good witches.
As the book buyer here, I am amazed at the number of newly published witch-related books appearing every year. Historical fiction, fiction, nonfiction, modern-day witchcraft, witches in literature are also exploding. And of course, in 1993, Disney's Hocus Pocus was released. This movie was set in Salem, and many of the scenes were filmed on location. It has become a beloved cult classic. For those of you who might not know, the sequel was just released and a public screening was held across the street from our building just 4 days ago on Salem Common.
Over the past 40 years, Haunted Happenings has evolved and continued to grow. In 1995, the Chamber of Commerce took over the sponsorship of our annual Haunted Happenings Grand Parade. This is a very community-oriented part of the month. It is the official kickoff to the season. School groups from Salem and the surrounding communities march in this themed parade, as do senior organizations, charitable groups, and other local associations. Residents and visitors line the streets. In fact, as we speak, this parade is actually happening right outside our door. When we are done, we will be going out to join the festivities. And these pictures that we have on screen, the one to the left is actually a picture from 2021 of the reverse parade. So as a COVID precaution, the parade was reversed, where the floats and things stood still and the people walked the streets, which was actually very fun. And to the right here, we have Jill at a Haunted Happenings parade years ago with two of her favorite fellas.
Here in Salem, we all get into the spirit very early. Two other community traditions are the Howl or Ween parade, which began in 2014, and as you may guess, is a pet costume parade. Also in early October, Salem hosts Mayor's Night Out. Children in costume trick-or-treat on Essex Street, and residents can visit local attractions for free or at a reduced price. During the first year of COVID, while we were all at very reduced staff levels, we admit we were hoping for less visitors. No matter what we said on the phone, this isn't open, that isn't open, you won't be able to park or eat or use the bathroom, people came anyway. And it was then we realized part of the draw of coming to Salem in October is to see and be seen. The costumes are now so spectacular and elaborate. People clearly spend an enormous amount of time and money creating their looks and getting ready to come to Salem. It's really fun to walk around and see the spectacle. One of our staff traditions, if you can get away for a few minutes, is to take a stroll around the block to see the amazing crowds. Here we see a picture on the left from the Bewitching Ball in 1982 versus the costumes we see regularly today on the right. 40 years ago, costumes were typically homemade, drawn from the items you had in your own closet. Today, people come to Salem dressed to the nines in elaborate costumes.
There's always an amazing array of street performers during this time of year. Here we can see just a few images. These are just some of our favorites. For example, the witch statue in the top row was on Essex Street for many years. Spider-Man was the #1 costume a few years ago. He was everywhere. Frankenstein and his bride are always here. In fact, I saw Frank casually walking down the street several weeks ago as I was running errands. The pumpkin-headed lady is one of our favorite costumes as well. And a new performer in the last couple years joined the usual cast of characters, this very elaborate Pennywise from Stephen King's It. Just walking down the street, Essex Street in October is always entertaining. And the decorations adorning the homes around Salem are often phenomenal. Here are just a few scenes from over the past years. People who live in Salem take seasonal decor very seriously. Not just in the downtown, but throughout the city. The houses seem to get more and more elaborate every year. New things happen each and every year, and the Salem Common across the street from our museum has really become a center of activities. A small children's carnival, which was on Derby Street for years, was for the last several years relocated to the Common. Last year, for the first time, the vendors who once lined Essex Street were moved to the Common for the Haunted Happenings Marketplace. Each of these vendors have unique wares, handmade clothing, jewelry, pottery, headpieces. The creativity is really wonderful. And this marketplace is back this year, Fridays through Sundays in October. Now, throughout Salem, you will also often see strange juxtapositions. For example, a costumed vampire family next to an end of days preacher holding a sign warning the crowd of their eternal damnation. This time of year, there are haunted houses and plays, ghost hunts and magic shows. There's the annual Salem Harvest Fest, which is now in its 15th year, which features craft beer, cider, and mead. And of course, there's the official Salem Witches Halloween Ball at the Hawthorne Hotel. There is also an annual zombie parade. I recall working during one of my first Octobers and being stopped in traffic for 20 minutes on my way home because I had to wait for the zombie parade to pass, only in Salem. The festivities are brought to a close on Halloween night with a fireworks show over the North River. We also want to just take a moment and shout out to the police from Salem and the surrounding towns who really do an incredible job. There are so many people here who often pay no attention to traffic, and it is the police who keep the crowds from literally walking in front of vehicles. It's also a challenge to manage people who become a little bit too intoxicated. We have tangled with a few of them ourselves late nights here at the museum.
We'd like to end with some final personal observations. On Labor Day weekend each year, we take a deep breath as the season approaches. We know the next 6 to 8 weeks will be crazy and stressful and exhausting. Not everything is wonderful this time of year. Ask anyone who works with the public in Salem. People get too drunk, they become frustrated by crowds and lines and parking shortages, and they can be very rude to workers. In our own personal experience, when we hear people's conversations on the streets, it's sometimes as though they think we're a theme park rather than a real city with people who live and work here. Some of the funny remarks we've heard from Salem visitors, they'll ask our staff if the witch trials discussed in our museum are the ones where the Sanderson sisters were killed. Or they'll stand outside the old Burying Point Cemetery, which is one of the oldest in the country, and wonder if it is real or a movie set. So if you plan to come to Salem in October, our number one ask is that you bring your patients with you. As is the case for so many, we're all very short-staffed this year, and we're doing the best we can to make your visit an enjoyable one. Even with the challenges, Salem in October is truly a magical place to be. People are so excited to be here. Visitors tell us each year just how long they have wanted to come to Salem in October. For some people, it is literally a lifelong dream. Others make this an annual tradition. We met a family a few years ago that has been coming for 20 years. While we don't have weddings at our museum, people do get engaged here, or they elope to Salem in October. They marry in beautiful settings, such as at the House of the Seven Gables, and couples plan their honeymoons for Salem in October. Here are 2 examples of couples who got engaged in front of our building. We love to see these photos.
We always enjoy seeing our visitors in costume, which begins in the summer and increases in the fall. We can only speak for our museum, which beyond some autumnal decorations does not change in October. We give the same history presentation all year. We are well aware that many of the people who come to visit us in October are not always expecting a history museum. Some remark they thought this would be a haunted house. It's gratifying to hear some portion of these visitors exiting our second exhibit discussing what they have just learned with enthusiasm. Now, we are huge fans of Halloween too, but our favorite aspect of October is that many people are exposed to this important history who would not necessarily seek it out otherwise. For those who knock Salem, thinking these festivities are disrespectful given the city's tragic history, and Jill admits she was once one of them when she first arrived 30 years ago. The haunted happenings developed organically here in Salem. And furthermore, if you understand the origins of Halloween, Samhain is the night you traditionally remember those who have passed. Think what you will, but for us, who remember the innocent victims of the 1692 witch hunts every day, Halloween, in a way, makes perfect sense. Salem is truly a place like no other, and we want to end with one of our favorite descriptions of our city from author Kristen Soleil's book, Witch Hunt, A Traveler's Guide to the Power and Persecution of the Witch. Quote, "Although I have visited many times, Salem always seems to remain just out of reach. Is it a haunted theme park? The witch industrial complex gone wrong? A sacred site of cultural memory? A charming New England town. It is all of these things, but more. Like so many cities with weighty history, Salem is a shapeshifter, becoming the place you want it to be when your feet are on the ground, when you walk among its people in parks and streets. Like the archetypal witch, Salem's magic lies in eluding simple characterizations, unquote. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation and perhaps have changed some of the preconceived notions about our city. We truly feel we're lucky to live and work in Salem and hope to meet some of you here someday. May we recommend visiting November through December. It's particularly lovely. So with that, we're going to turn our camera back on. Hello, everybody. And we do have some time for questions if anybody has them. Seeing some thank yous in here. That's lovely. We always love to see that. And some happy Halloweens. We'll give it a moment if anybody is typing anything in the chat.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloweens. It does feel to us as though we are at Halloween already.
Thank you,
Renee. Thank
Yes.
you to Melanie.
In November, we will be getting some rest.
All the way from Florida.
Oh,
Thank
nice.
you.
Yeah, thinking about everybody in Florida, that's for sure.
Very much so.
Thanks, Isabel. Thank you for coming.
Alrighty, so if there are no questions, then we want to thank you all for coming. Oh, so we have one. Are there any tours of the hill? So I assume you mean Proctor's Ledge, where the executions took place. I don't know that any of the walking tours go up there.
They don't, because it's a very small location and it's in the middle of a residential area. So we all try to be very respectful of the people who live in that neighborhood. Our suggestion always is, if you, especially for descendants, if you want to see the location, you drive up to Gallows Hill and you walk down to Proctor's Ledge, because it's a one-way street. There's nowhere to park there. Oh, that's so nice from Puerto Rico. Thank you very much. Oh, that's funny. We go broke in the gift shop too.
This was fun and informative. Oh, thank you. Have there been any spooky going on?
As in like ghostly things? No, not here. There's claims in town, but who knows?
Yeah, you know, we're not the right people to ask, because
Yeah.
we're not into
Yeah.
ghosty stuff.
California.
Does it snow in Salem in October?
Sometimes.
So I think 2 years ago we had a snowstorm on Halloween, which was kind of funny.
It actually postponed trick-or-treating for towns around because of the snow.
So it's kind of hit or miss. We usually don't start getting consistent snow until December, but especially the past couple of years, the weather's been so crazy, it's hard to tell one year to the next. Are you guys hiring?
Yeah.
I think we actually just
We're
stopped
probably
for the
finished for the
season.
season, but come work next year.
Mhm.
I thought Lori Cabot was more involved. No, it was really those two organizations, our museum but she was
involved in the, you know, the costume contest. She's the judge. So she was definitely a participant, but in terms of organizers, not to our knowledge. We're very lucky that our museum's executive director, Tina Jordan, is a collector. She has diligently saved so many things over the years. And
she worked here 43 years, so she was here for this.
So we have an amazing archive here at our museum of from this time. And also Tina and Biff are both walking archives. So that's what we based all this research on. So to our knowledge, I don't think Lori Cabot was that involved beyond participating.
Snow looks great in Salem. I would like not to see it for a while.
Although that would mean October is over. So
That's true.
We kid mostly. All righty. Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. We're seeing lots of thank yous. It's lovely to see you all virtually. This will be posted on our YouTube page, and do check out the other lectures we have posted there. We've done a lot of free virtual lectures this year, and all of them are available on our YouTube page in their entirety. So have a great October, everyone. Wishing you a safe and fun Halloween from all of us here in Salem. Stop and